Welcome to this week's episode of Safe Room, your weekly source for horror gaming discussions and proudly part of Bloody Disgusting's Bloody FM podcast network. I'm your host, Jay Krieger.
And I'm the other one, Neil Bolt.
And this week, we've got an all-new roundup of Horror Bites, our indie horror showcase where Neil and I both bring a couple of bite-sized experiences. Sometimes they're demos and sometimes they're these game jam entries that we kind of just stumble upon during the course of a week and whatnot. Before moving into our grab bag, which is going to highlight other types of games that we've been playing, typically a little bit longer, but at the same time, we like to sneak in a few shorter experiences in there as well. Let's not stand on ceremony. Let's jump right into it for Horror Bites. Which of our picks would you like to chat about first?
Let's go with the appetizers, shall we? Let's go with Colonia.
Colonia was one that, again, I randomly stumbled upon. And this jumped out to me because it features that, Game Boy Classic or Game Boy Color aesthetic that we love to see developers utilize. It, presents something that you would have wanted in the era with which the Game Boy was around, but naturally you never would have seen it, just whether it's based on the overt horror of it or just maybe even this game kind of like exceeds some of the system requirements of the Game Boy itself. But Colonia is from a developer, Zany Pixels, and it is a survival horror sort of in the vein of a point and click adventure, kind of like it reminds me in a way of Resident Evil Gaiden, in the sense that, your perspective is one where you're basically first person, but you have to click on these arrows to have you move in different directions to explore the facility, basically. And the developer notes that this is mostly just like a gameplay test. But I think, and I'm interested to see what you think. There is a fair bit of depth to this one that I was pleasantly surprised by. So, in terms of standard survival horror, in your navigating this sort of decrepit environment, you're going to come up against, doors that are barred, and you need to find some key items, whether it's like a key itself or a crowbar of some sort to like pry boards off of the wall. But there is also this RPG sort of combat system to it where you have to manage your various attributes before getting into combat with various types of creatures, like tentacle monsters with teeth and these like ghostly apparitions and whatnot. But I think for me, what I really just appreciate about it was it has such a cool look to it. It really utilizes the limitations, whether that be the color palette or just the technical limitations of the Game Boy. And it just presents this very retro look, but like the most refined version of that. It's relatively short. I think I probably spent about 10 minutes or so with this. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was maybe a couple of minutes added on just to kind of figure out how to actually play this. There's no tutorial. And so you have to kind of like play around with the controls a bit. But once you get a handle on that, I think it's pretty entertaining for being such a short but impressive little gameplay test. What did you think of Colonia?
Yeah, I mean, they kind of alluded to the fact that it's not really a game proper. It's just like a sketching of an idea, effectively. Probably, which is why it ends as abruptly as it does. But yeah, like you say, it's like the details are there. Like I say, it's almost Game Boy Advance-esque, I suppose, if you were to push it in sort of like details and colors and stuff. It's a game, funny enough, that made me think of like how games would used to be sort of like valued. And, if you were to make a Game Boy Advance game that had a color palette very similar to a Game Boy game, you'd probably get criticized for not making the most of the power of the console, sort of thing. But the fact they put so much detail into it and made it feel quite atmospheric, for how small it is. Yeah, I really enjoyed that about it. It was like, we've played games obviously like it, modern games like that are throwback, like World of Horror, do very similar things in terms of the combat system. Yeah, I'd like to see more of it. That's for sure. Like what they've got there is quite strong, in terms of ideas, and in terms of monster design, and even like the ideas around weaponry, maybe as well. Like just they might fit with the kind of enemies you come up against. In a way, it did actually remind me a lot of those sort of early days of World of Horror when it was early access, and you could sort of see the rough sketch of what they were trying to do in terms of ambition. Obviously, it's a much, much smaller sort of scale thing, but yeah, you can see the idea of what they want to do, and with the asylum setting and how much you could fit into that as well, and like, I mean, yeah, there's a wave of games like this, that have utilized the sort of RPG style mechanics and turn-based combat and stuff that really have been a great fit for horror. We've Look Outside is another very recent example in terms of using aspects of that we really enjoyed. And yeah, I'm all for it. And these sort of visual style of it as well, I think, again, just going somewhere where not many people have gone, like you said, not exactly Game Boy, but something slightly more. Yeah, you're kind of just finding a niche that works and makes your game look a bit different. Yeah. So yeah, like I think I very much on board with you about the needs better onboarding for the controls, but yeah, I mean, in a way, if you were being kind, you could say, well, that does kind of feed into the the disarray you kind of feel, being in this situation, and how panicked do you feel about, oh God, what do I do? What do I do? But I don't think you could really maintain that for a whole game. Now, come on. So it's so just put some controls in. That's fine. That's all we want.
Well, along those lines, if you go check out Zany Pixel's itch page, they've since doing Colonia, they have released another Game Boy fully retro game that actually boasts its ability to run on Game Boy Color like technology and whatnot. And this is actually a full-fledged game, and it seems like they've kind of like taken lessons learned from the test of Colonia in terms of, while it's a completely different style of game, this other one that they have seems to be something along the lines of like a spacecraft shooter that kind of is a 2D Metroidvania-esque. But my point being, they've done a lot better job with the onboarding. They've got, controls, they've got lists of features and everything. And again, like this game completely lacks the use of generative AI. So it's very cool to see a developer who, what we played was just a gameplay test, but then seeing that they potentially have taken what they've learned from that and applied it to, a full-fledged release. And they even had another game that was like a Game Boy Color kind of Dark Souls-esque game that they had made previously. So yeah, it'll be a developer keep an eye on for their next kind of Game Boy centric project. Hopefully we see Colonia flourish into something else, but it was very entertaining for what it was.
Yeah, and as a little aside as well, as you kind of mentioned it about the lack of generative AI, it's kind of depressing to see like the witch hunts effectively go on now as well. When you look at the comments under these games, where you will get people asking or accusing the developers of doing that, like when it's very obvious, it's like these games don't. In a lot of cases, it's very, very obvious that they don't, and it's like, yeah, it just kind of makes you sigh. And just, yeah, that's what this has done now. Where you're just going to have people making stuff that is genuinely them, and people are just going to come and go, well, I couldn't possibly do it, so it must be AI sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, unfortunate. I didn't so much notice it with this one. It was more with another game we're covering later. But I'd seen a comment about it, and I think someone that had been banned comments were along a similar vein, but more accusing, if you will. But yes, annoying. One of the many, many annoying things about it.
All right. Well, there's plenty of games out there that aren't properly disclosing they use AI. So rather than having a witch hunt against people that aren't using it. Hopefully that negativity will get pointed in a different direction because people like Zany Pixels doing tremendous original work. So happy to stumble upon that one. But for your pick for a horror bite this week, why don't we chat about Creepshow?
Yeah, which we got provided code for by the PR as well. So thank you very much for that. Obviously, we always put that disclosure that we do work with DreadXP, and obviously there's a DreadXP thing, but we don't anymore. So it's not really connected in that sense, but still got to disclose these things at the same time. So yeah, based very much on the well-known movies and TV series, more on the TV series by Greg Nicotero, and that has been on Shudder in recent years, where you have an anthology of horror stories told. I think the episode format is normally like 2 like stories per episode in TV show, and like the movies are like 3, 4 sort of thing. First movie obviously has some very iconic sort of looks, sort of going back to those horror comics of the 50s in terms of like visual styling and flair, which sounds like a cool thing, and works really well. It should as a game. You've got this whole, like I said, that visual style, which I think Telltale, for all the faults and foibles, did very well when they adapted the Walking Dead comic into an episodic series, where you had that comic book a feel of it maintained and brought into a 3D sense. A little looser here, obviously. You are still having that sort of comic-y book vibe, like with a almost cel shaded sort of look. But in structure terms, at least, it is following the movies more than the TV series, I would say, just because it has its main wraparound story and has its stories within that are told. And you just happen to be interacting with them. Obviously, it's been a while in sort of development in terms of, but being a small company, you are going to get that it will take a bit longer, and being a license as well probably doesn't help. I was very intrigued with this, especially because Creepshow is like a really cool idea to use for a video game in terms of that anthology thing. We've talked about anthology games before and how well they've done, and we'll be talking about an anthology game later as well that did the things quite interestingly. But obviously the key thing here is like telling memorable stories is the main thing. And probably the most difficult thing initially in terms of getting to those stories was nothing to do with them and more of technical issues, which pre-release, understandable, they happen. You accept bugs. But I was shocked when I found out this game was basically movie length, which not a bad thing. Like I think in many ways it was a smart decision. Again, fits very much in that sort of short form anthology horror format. But the way we both had problems with this game in that sort of run up meant that it was a much longer experience than it should have been.
Yes.
I got caught up in the very first episode where interactions just became impossible, and I had to restart completely, and go back to it. Which after that, a few days after that, it was a breeze. Didn't really have any problems like that, and that was fine. I think you had problems as well on the second episode as well, and if I remember rightly,
I had issues with the first and second when it came to trying to interact with some of the puzzles. When I would click on them, if my character was standing too close to an object when I interacted with it, then the camera would be so pushed in that like you could still see the back of their head, but the back of their head is obscuring some of the puzzle. And so that kind of was obviously detriment to my being able to actually see anything. And that happened a couple of times. And even after like a patch, I still encountered that periodically. So I've had to then just like be extra aware of my proximity to things I was going to interact with.
Yeah, I think it's been more fiddly rather than being stopping me in my tracks, which is like a massive step up. But given like the brevity of this game, where you are about an hour and a half, really, if you all in, if you did it, had a smooth ride. You kind of, it's a disappointing thing to have, and so. But as I said, most of those problems did come before launch, so I can kind of excuse that. And I had like I said, a smoother ride after that. The game itself, though, the stories have very interesting hooks, but you can kind of see where they're going. They kind of feel derivative of stories that have been told in the Creepshow format in other anthology horrors. And I mean, the Creep is not like the Crypt Keeper, as much as it's modeled on that same sort of thing, in that same sort of style of a very snarky, sort of quippy sort of host thing. It doesn't really work here. I think it just feels a bit. The acting feels a bit bored, I suppose, is the best way to put it. Which, I get what they were going for, was like a sort of casual observer making remarks sort of thing, but I don't know, because of the way the game is, it didn't really feel connected in the way that I hoped. The gameplay is very simple as well, which made the whole idea of there being these technical problems coming up with the actual gameplay aspect of it quite frustrating. I mean, one of the most like intense things to do in this game is like in the first episode proper, where you like repeat like the making of burgers, basically. Which is where I had like technical issues on several things where it stopped the game in its tracks beforehand. But like the system of it's quite cool. Kind of felt quite intuitive once you get into it. The repetition of it as a thematic idea of how drudgingly like monotonous it is as an idea, to just keep making the burgers and it not being quick enough for what the game wants, and like the little psychological effects that it has as you go on. Like that was a real strong suit, but like I said, it was kind of soured by what happened around it. I mean, that first episode to me is, when we talk about story, probably the strongest one, just because it's so, dark, in terms of what it's going for and how absurd it is. Again, the group doesn't really need to sort of comment on the fact that we're very aware that it's a very absurd situation and that it's just getting more and more absurd. But yeah, it feels like most of the ideas are in that. Like, I mean, the second story, especially, is like, once see the first bit, like, okay, so where do you take this story? And it doesn't really pay off very well for me. And the overarching story as well is, I don't know, it doesn't really pay off either. I think properly. I think there's just this. I expected more from it. I thought it had a bit more of a sting in the tail, and all these problems kind of come about because it is quite brief. And like I said, which again is not a problem for the way they want to tell this story in this game. It makes sense, but it needed to be punchier. It needed not to have the problems it had, and it really needed to pay off its stories properly. Like I said, first one does a good job. Just you can kind of see it coming, sort of thing. Which is, maybe that's just me, maybe not, but still. And visually, it's not great. Like,
No.
I get they're going for the EC Comics style, but it doesn't really feel like it enough. I mean, I think back to that bit in What Remains of Edith Finch where they kind of ate that style for that one section. That did a better job. But yeah, because it's all in that style, that when you have those moments of it like cutting to the, where it really looks like that, and you have the bright colored backgrounds that are synonymous with like Creepshow, you don't really get the same effect because it's all like it anyway. And yeah, I don't know. It's like, it's a bit disappointing. I guess would be the
Yeah,
way to put it. It's like I don't
yeah.
think it's bad. I just think there could have been more to it. I think, which is a shame because, like I said, concept is there. You know, everything is there to make this what it should be. It just feels a bit not unfinished because that would be very unfair. I don't think it's unfinished at all. I just think it feels like a project that had momentum that got cut somewhere. So it didn't quite really get the time it needed when it needed it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, just find that like the pacing is not very well done in my opinion. Because, like you said, don't have an issue with the length at all. But I would equate this almost to like an 85, 90 minute horror feature film, but of like the indie variety, where often like the main critique can be that it's like, oh well, the budget, we can see the budget went to 15% of the horror, and then there's all this filler around it. And that's kind of how I felt about this, in that it's so short and yet that time is not maximized well at all. Like, for instance, the first story in particular, we've praised past games for their ability to, you know, kind of exploit the drudgery of work, right? So
Yes.
you go through the days, this guy who, his predicament at home, but then, you have to go to work and you have to do the monotony of the burger building mini game, basically. But we do that about 5 times, 4 or 5 times, I think, of going through the motions. And I couldn't help but feel like it would have been so much punchier if each time we had done that, it started to delve more into the horror, or you started to just like give us these little breadcrumbs. Like at one point, you start to see his psychosis start to appear in various ways and hallucinations, but like it just didn't feel like it was paced as well as it could have been in terms of giving us these little scares, these little nods to horror or what could be going on. And it just kind of felt like you're going through the motions for too long. By that point, like you said, you kind of already know where this is heading. So, which is not an issue, a problem, but if we already know where we're heading, you need to make that journey a bit more memorable or notable.
Yes.
In that regard, like there's also a moment in the second one, the Toll Keeper, where you approach this church and you can either go one of two ways, left or right. Well, if you choose to go left, like I did initially, then you walk down this long winding road for almost 5 minutes. And then there's nothing else to do down there because that part is tied to a later section of that story. That long route with nothing on it becomes pretty important later on, but not in the initial section. So it was like, why not block that off for the initial part if there's literally nothing over there to do at the very genesis of or the inception of that second story.
Yeah, it was very true, actually, the game in general. There was a lot of places you can go that you don't need to go yet. Things you can get that you don't need to do. It's just like, well, clearly this is going to be for later, and it's not the first game in the world to do that, but it's like, yeah, making it just wasted space. And it just frustrated again because you are messing your own pacing up for something so punchy as we said that you need to be, that you want to make sure everything flows right. It's trying to have the illusion of like a freedom to make it feel like, this sounds derogatory, but more of a game. You get to have more interaction, you get to do more stuff. Because if you did streamline it and take those little bits out where you shouldn't be going here or doing that yet, it would feel very straightforward, very, well, I'm not really doing much here sort of thing. And which is, unfortunately, it's the truth of the game, that you don't do a lot in any of it apart from walk to point A to point B, press a button, and that's it, which is, again, perfectly fine if you do it in the right way. But I don't know, it feels like it's conflicted between the two. Like it wants to hide that and is kind of ashamed of it, which is shouldn't be the case. There's plenty there that they could have done with it, but yeah, it's an odd choice. Like given the people involved, I was surprised to be honest, that there was these little bits and pieces that didn't feel like they'd had the care or the attention. Not care. Okay, so yeah, attention would be the better thing. Where you kind of maybe you pick that up and go, yeah, maybe that's not needed there. Maybe we can just find a way to cut that bit off and change this bit up. Yeah, given the amount of time that we've known about this game being made, it does feel rushed in so many ways, which I don't believe it would have been. I think, given the time it's had, obviously we can't know that whole story, but it just puzzles me that we ended up getting a game like this out of it, which is got the elements there, absolutely, of what Creepshow has and could have been cool like that. And we've seen other adaptations do the right thing with that. But yeah, it's something about it doesn't quite feel all there.
Yeah, I think that for me, like, what I would have greatly preferred was to have more stories, which would be fewer large environments. Like, give me smaller, more self-contained little stories that, if it's still 90 minutes, it's still 90 minutes. But I feel like if you are going to have an experience that is this length, it needs to be punchy and quick, and you need to be providing stories that, I mean, at this point, like, if you're going to be doing Creepshow or if you're going to be doing Tales from the Crypt, you're obviously going to have some stories that are derivative to an extent of what was done in the film or the TV series, which I wouldn't begrudge them for doing that. But at the same time, like, these two stories just felt so plain, I suppose. I don't know. They didn't feel very inspired. And I feel like if you're only going to have two stories, and I'm not even going to include the main overarching narrative with the kids in the mall, like there's barely anything there. But in terms of those two stories that you're playing through, like, they didn't do much for me. I think that first one, like, where you're headed with that finale. And if it had been this short little 15, 20-minute bite-sized thing, like, okay, that's got more stopping power. That's a little bit punchier. And then you move on to the next thing. But the fact that that is one of two stories in this game and the length that's required to get through both of those, I lost interest basically because the journey to get to that payoff was so laborious for me. And the same thing with the second story as well. Like, again, it's a premise that is somewhat derivative, but at the same time, I'm not going to begrudge it for that. But then, it's like I'm fixing up pews and I'm solving obtuse puzzles. Like, it left a lot to be desired for me, unfortunately. And it does feel underbaked is the way that I think I'll put it. It feels underbaked for a Creepshow game.
It feels old school in a derogatory way. Like it feels like padding at times to, like I said, to hide the length of it. And again, if I was to theorize, it would be, given that we'd known about this game's existence for a while, given the license, there was obviously going to be an expectation of how much of this is there, what is it exactly, and like you said, two stories and a wraparound doesn't feel like much at all. But if it had been like a shorter development time, or it had been a surprise, I don't think people would have cared. Like if it had been a shorter game at all, especially if you like said, well, this is just like the first one of these, which I assume is the plan. Is like, this is just like season 1, episode 1, or whatever like that, and you could do another one, but not if it's going to be, a couple of years at a time for each one, or even a year at a time, because you need the momentum, you need the goodwill, and to be fair, this isn't really doing the best job of setting it up for success in the future. Yeah, which I don't really want, because I really think Creepshow, like I said, as a game, is a really good idea and could be more. And I don't know, if we had a more concrete plan of what there was with this and what could be going forward, that would help. But Yeah, I think it's a difficult one when you're at smaller development studio scale for a license like that, to put stuff out at a certain tempo, because it's not TV. You can't, or even movies. You have to work slower by nature because you just don't have the resources or the time or the people in general to push things out quicker. And we don't want that. We don't want crunch. We don't want people just pushing themselves to the limit just to put out anything, just to make sure that there's not such a big gap, because that's the way the market is now, where people will forget about your game. We've seen that in the indie space with many like beloved indie games, of like the 2010s, that would belatedly put out sequels like a decade later, and they kind of shrugged off, like nothing, like, because unlike big budget blockbusters, they don't have the marketing department to make that make people remember and have that sort of constant presence in people's minds of like, they'll remember like, oh, here's Spider-Man 2 or Spider-Man 3, and that's fine, even if your time with that first or second game was like you played it and really didn't think about it much afterwards. It's big and it's in your face and you remember. Like, you can't do that as easily on a smaller scale, which is again nothing that you can fault developers or studios at this level for. But yeah, it's the frustrating thing that comes with anything like this, where it's licensed and you want to make the most of that license.
Yeah, unfortunately, just looking over the Steam page, even as we're talking about this, it just seems as if it was dumped out onto Steam. And if you like look at the features list, it's like all the thrills and chills you expect from Shudder's Creepshow, which, as we've pretty much said, like, no, it's not indicative of that. But then, like, one of the second feature it lists is that you're playing through an overarching narrative with 2 additional self-contained stories. Like, okay, that's just a description of what this game is. And then it like stylized comic book environments with horror mini games throughout each story. Like, it feels like, as half-baked as the experience is, it feels like even less effort was kind of like gone into like promoting this in a way that like makes it like nothing about this feature list says that this is something that I have to play. Like, I don't know. It's just, as a complete package, I just am seeing this as, okay, clearly something occurred during the development of this, but there hasn't even been any sort of like communication about plans for the future. And while those might be happening behind closed doors about, more episodes or, more new stories down the line, like, I feel like there's not even an update about like bugs, which we both encountered. And even after patches, I still encountered 1 or 2 other things when I went back to boot it up because I was just curious. So like, yeah, the lack of follow through on this and the sort of like lack of enthusiasm, I think, even stemming from this Steam page, doesn't make me optimistic about the future of getting more content, which, if they were to release new stories, I would be happy to give it the benefit of the doubt and check it out, because I think there is a lot of promise there. I think, though, that like just the lack of overall transparency in that regard about updates, whether it's even just talking about bugs or patches and things, is just like doesn't fill me with a lot of confidence about the potential future, despite what I think is a perfect format. And like you said, the look of this game, I dig the look of it. So I think between it being anthology and kind of capturing that classic Creepshow look, like, it could be something, but this just is not it at the moment. And I shudder to think what it's going to look like down the line if it continues to get supported.
Yeah, and I don't know, sometimes with this, because like I said, when you for a smaller scale development, I think when you've got a lot of projects on the go, no, not everyone's involved with every project, but obviously some you're going to have this crossover. You kind of are going to have problems sometimes, I guess, and like this feels like it's from the beginning of that time, where we had the sort of the new Dirt XP, if you will, like that. and obviously some projects were already being made and other things. I think maybe it's possibly just a victim of time, of the timing of when it came, and when the opportunity came, and which is unfortunate. But yeah, like I said, especially on a small scale, life happens, and that can change all sorts of things about what you're making and how you're making it. And I mean, not to say anything about like Shudder and their owners and what they might think or do about Creepshow and about and Shudder in general. Like, so there's often rumors about that and how well or not well things are going in that regard. So yeah, that's the other problem they got, is you're dealing with those external issues and like requirements that can make development hard, which we've, I suppose, seen with the Paranormal Activity game, which had the same, which ended up being cancelled outright because the sensible decision was made that can't do this in these parameters. We'll just have to say no, regretfully, sort of thing. Whereas I think this maybe was a bit more locked in and had to be done, and like I said, just in a way feels pushed out and just we've done it sort of thing and got it out of the way, which again would be a bad thing in the long run if they didn't sort of maybe try to redeem it in any way and add to it. But yeah, that's the thing. It just makes me sad, which is the worst part about it. Like, because I didn't expect like the moon from it at all, but I expected something a bit more than what it is. Like I said, not the worst thing I've ever played by any stretch of the imagination, but just like I think with those modest expectations, to be disappointed was not the greatest sort of feeling.
Yeah, I think especially when you have a IP that's as beloved as Creepshow, you only want the best for it. So when you see it fall maybe well below the expectation and not live up to that beloved name, it is just an extra bummer because even if it didn't have the Creepshow name attached to it, our feelings on this would be the same. But to have that Creepshow name on the box, as it were, it just kind of sours it even a little bit more, I think, because if you just want to see developers succeed, especially when it's got that fan base attached to it, and it makes me worried that if they do now kind of like regroup and release additional episodes, is there going to be any goodwill there to give them the benefit of the doubt from the majority of people that had played it? I could speculate on the answer to that, but I think we'll have an open mind if they announce additional stories and content down the line, but I'm also not holding my breath on that announcement anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, it may just be another case of it's sensible to just leave it there and see what you can do from other things. I mean, in the meantime, other things have come out and been bright and strong and done well. So, like, just focus on the momentum of making original things, I guess, and maybe learn from the experiences of having to work with these bigger companies and licenses. It's not always easy, and and like I said, I guess we won't know exactly what went down with it, but at the same time, we'll see.
Let's round out Horror Bites on a bit of a more positive note, that being another anthology horror game, which we both spent a lot of time with, almost as much time as we did with Creepshow. And in this regard, I think the next game left a bit more positive of a flavor of anthology horror for us, and that being the latest from a developer that we've chatted about a number of times now on the podcasts, that being the latest from AV Dassault, 667 Fantagoria, which is an anthology horror game with 7 chilling tales. But instead of just like, okay, the first tale looks like every tale that comes after it, but it tells a different story, like, this is actually taken a step further in that each one of the stories is presented not only covering different thematics to the narrative and the characters, but it also takes on different gameplay styles, different graphical styles, and overall just like a completely different aesthetic for each one of the stories, which I was completely impressed with. Like I was captivated from the jump because of the fact that, again, this is like a developer that typically speaking, their experiences are not along the anthology route. And so, which is fine, but it just feels like such a monumental undertaking to not only have the amount of stories that are being told here, but also to deliver what feels like a completely new experience with each subsequent story. So, like, for example, the very first story is about you're working at a gas station, and in between helping people with their gas needs, you learn like, oh, there's people going missing in town, and the last guy who had your job went missing as well. And it's presented as this like almost like Atari-esque 2D side scroller, very pixelated, not in a derogatory way, but like it's visually completely unremarkable. And that's just what it is. And it's a pretty short experience. It's a little bit of a flavor kind of just to get you primed. And then the next story looks like a JRPG game, and you're in the role of a family dog, and in between like observing various sort of kitchen sink drama that's going on in the house, you come across a serial killer in the backyard, and they kind of ask you to either join them or basically kind of like wanting you to give your input on what should befall the fate of your owners and whatnot based on the things that you've observed during those kitchen sink dramas. And then in what I think is probably the most impressive story there within is the third one, which is a point and click adventure game, which again, just like completely shifts from what the presentation of the graphical style and also the gameplay has been leading up to that point. And each one of these experiences I found like does their own separate presentations and gameplay styles like justice. It does a really great job, I think, of like having ownership and understanding on the type of gameplay that it's taking on. And, the presentation there within, I think, makes each story feel slightly more refreshing than even if it might be somewhat derivative of something you've played previously. I think it's just like the overall art and care that went into instilling that this next experience, while there might be some narrative connections, it is a completely different experience from what you just did previously. And, I thought that was just really, really impressive overall.
Yeah, I mean, it has obviously like a connecting tissue between each story that you can kind of pick up on, because the writing is simplistic in most cases. Like it's not going for anything like super in depth or like clever beyond like a certain kind of humor, which is we know that about the AV Dusthouse games, that they have a very certain crude kind of humor, and that works in some cases. It's funny and absurd in others, and it's the babysitter one is like the one where it's just like I know that the big boobed woman thing is like a big thing in some games by the developer, but it's like the fact that we get down to the whole I fell over and I was only stopped from hitting my face because of my boobs sort of thing, and then just like as an aside before you actually get into the thing, it's fun in its own way, but I do find it quite refreshing that it is just games that don't give a shit about like boundaries in that regard, I guess. Like it's just like it will do all sorts of crude things, like the Fido story, really gets like very descriptive, shall we say. Like
doesn't it just
I find it very amusing that like there's this whole thing at the beginning about like there's censor bars for nudity and things like that, and like you can click yes to basically have even greater censoring of that. It's like, but like the description of violence in this is like ludicrous to beyond. I mean, the
aggressive.
I mean, the killer's glee of describing what they do to people, like in that Fido episode, was just like, it took me aback slightly because I normally I haven't read stuff like that for a while.
Yeah.
Like it kind of reminded me of like Richard Lehman books, which are like these very like extreme horror, which is all very seedy, it's all sex and violence in the nastiest way possible, sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's like, which to be fair, I did used to sort of like want to see in games like that. So it's in this particular way where it's very absurd in the way that Dosso goes about it. Like I think it just makes it more surprising because it's like, what the fuck? Where'd that come from? Sort of thing, like that. I do think that kind of offsets like how simplistic the stories are, like, and the dialogue being very straightforward and very like in your face about explaining things to you. Like, I mean, in that first story, like where people just literally just go up to you and like give you the exposition of like, oh yeah, heard there's a serial killer, heard there's a thing under the garage, sort of thing. It's like, yeah, it's like it works because of the kind of stories that are being told and how odd and disturbing they are. I go back to the Fido one because I think it's very strong in terms of like pushing the boundaries with the horror stuff in how descriptive it is, but just like also in those little weird cutscenes that are there as well, like where there's a graphic sort of stabbing of eyes of a child, which is like, I was like, oh, okay, like that, and like no, not like, oh, it's a teenager, or like the youngest child, like whose like last interaction was like talking about wanting ice cream. Their parents to have like an argument about an affair, and it's like, yeah, like this is very much reveling in that darkness and that horrible, seedy side of things. But yeah, there's so many fun things with it. I think that sort of change from game to game to game, like I'm with you on the same episode, just where using like the like photographic sort of visual style of like being able to sort of point and click two different areas. Like I like that. Like I said, going back to that Fido thing, just the idea of the RPG maker sort of style of game and anything in that that's like disturbed and weird. I think we talked about this a lot with like stuff like Outside, where it scratches a certain itch because a lot of the sort of mythology of like those games like that, where this creepy bit in it and that, but actually having games that are designed to be disturbing and creepy in that mold, like makes them more striking, I think. And yeah, I do love the variety. I mean, I love the hand drawn stuff that Dossal's had in previous games as well. So like it's such a distinct voice, I think in this field, like to have someone who's not trying to sort of curry favor and like and compromise on what they're showing, like bad taste be damned. And I am surprised that given stuff that does get banned, like it's surprising that this is on itch.io, but I'm glad it is. Like it does kind of show the hypocrisy of that whole system with what was and wasn't being banned. But yeah, no, this is just Matt. I didn't expect it to go on as long as it did as well, which was a couple of hours. But yeah, it was engaging enough because it was so straightforward, very pulpy. Like I said, just like a pulpy series of absurd Richard Lehman novels. Like, and I was like, yeah, okay. Not certainly glad I didn't play it with the kids around or his wife around, honestly, because it was at the same time, it's like, yeah, it was again, we talked about pacing before in terms of anthologies. Like the stuff is different lengths and different styles of gameplay, but there's just the right amount of story and just the right amount of intrigue to sort of make each one work. I mean, the babysitter one is absurd and has interesting things happen in it. It's probably the one I feel is weakest, only in the sense of there's a bit of a drag in the middle of it, but yeah, generally everything kind of sits in the right comfort zone for how long it should be and what it has in it.
Yeah, and I think just having the wherewithal to maybe switch up just enough tonally in between each of those stories, because like we were saying about the point and click one that uses like old photographs, like that one tonally is completely devoid of the elements that are found like in the babysitter story, or even the more, gruesome and graphic descriptions of violence in the Fido story. So I wouldn't say that like the tone worked for me in each one of these, but I think again, coming back to the fact that it feels very refreshing to switch things up as much as each story does, switching up that tone as well, I think is quite important for me specifically. Cause like some of the stuff in like the babysitter one I find at this point is pretty tiresome. So to not have every single story feel like it's basically just recycling those elements just because they can was again like a bit. I suppose it was just impressive, like that again. As many games as the developer has published on itch, they are able to rein in their own sort of like unfettered creativity at times in that regard. Just because you can doesn't mean you always have to. So that's kind of my feelings on that overall. But yeah, again, a really impressive showing, I think, from this developer, and one that probably check out something that they release in the future, because there's somebody we keep returning to periodically.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the third, fourth thing we've covered now, I think. So yeah, like I'm very intrigued to sort of see how they go from that. And like I said, very distinct voice in the place. I mean, yeah, I think we had Pizza of Creeps recently, didn't we? That we covered, which is from a while back in the sort of thing. But yeah, like I think they've done that anthology thing with Grotesque or whatever it was. I think that was
Grotesque. Yep,
that's right. Yep. Yeah. So I like the idea of like stuff like this where you are just sort of seeing different creative outlets for like different stories, but making it fit. And I think like again, I think the key thing here is it could have very easily gotten out of hand, but because each story is simplistic enough that you can tie things together quite easily, and really focus on like delivering very particular horror moments. Whether that be the disgusting or the disturbing. And yeah, that's a skill I haven't seen a lot of horror developers have, to be honest. Like to be able to sort of mix and match like this. Obviously, other things would be a weakness in terms of like something more cerebral, but which again, not to sort of discredit what's being done. I think that's again, this is a developer knows exactly what they want to make, and I admire that it's just so singular as a vision that you can tell. I think when you put the link in, I didn't even see the name. I was like, oh, it's the same as that developer of blah blah. Like, and it's just, it's like it's the Doppelpartment guy. It's like it's obvious straight away, and that's great. Like you want to have something that is like very much you and your identity, and long live it.
Even though, unfortunately, Creepshow didn't deliver the anthology horror we were hoping, we still got to cover a piece of anthology horror that kind of was able to deliver a bit more on terms of the scares and creativity in that regard. So that was a nice coincidence.
But I reckon we're good for a break.
Yeah. Why don't we take a quick break? When we come back, we'll chat about some of the other games that we've been playing this week. But more on those in a moment. And we're back from our break, and let's kick things off with a game that we both had played, which is Dawn of the Machine, which is new DLC content from Machine Games for the original Quake of all things, but of all things, because it's Quake's 30th anniversary as of I think it was June of this year.
Yeah.
And so, the Machine Games, who, in the past has done DLC content. I think previously it was for Quake 2, was it not?
I think they've done for both. They've done bits and bobs, yeah. But yeah, I think the Quake 2 got some new stuff when that got its remake or remaster.
So they've Machine Games has been busy kind of revitalizing these classics with new levels and things, but and you'll tell me how you feel about it. Like with Dawn of the Machine, I notably, and have not spent as much time with Quake as you have over the years, but this feels a bit more substantial in terms of like a new campaign than just a series of like master levels, if you will, akin to, you know, like Doom or something.
It gave me the same sort of like wonder and excitement as when you would get like the add-on packs for first-person shooters that were like they would change stuff. Then they were probably not that much of a change, but they make the games feel different, you know. And this is like wild how much new stuff it is whilst still being Quake, you know, essentially in so much stuff. The fact that it is, if you would just sort of look at it cynically, go, well, it's just remixing stuff that already is and adding some more modern touches, like, but that's a lot for what this. I mean, we see so many like boomer shooters that are trying to ape that style whilst also, you know, bringing modern touches to it, and that's great and all. But to see an actual boomer shooter come back again with something that makes it feel modern while still being exactly the game it was, wow! It just honestly, it just felt like playing all over again, like something new. It felt like playing a new Quake game, like in so many ways, whilst it's being very relatable. Just the joy of those little technological touches that make it something new, like the remixes of enemies and weaponry, and just like that whole time hopping thing that's in this, basically, where you can, you know, so to get into the DLC itself, it's like it is just like its own sort of standalone story. 19 or so maps, I think, in a new campaign that basically all connects together. And yeah, you're in this dimension where I think they call it time folds back in, you know, stuff. So you have this loop effectively where if you do something in the present, it can reshape the future. And it's done in a way that is quite subtle at first, because obviously storytelling has never been like the most upfront thing with these games, but you would you do get to experience it quite vividly, I think, at times. And yeah, it basically acts as like this weird expansion bridge between Quake games in a way, just in terms of like visual style and like the enemies you face and stuff. It's like suddenly it starts feeling like Quake 1.5, you know, but also Quake 2.5 as well in other ways because of the extra changes. I mean, it's brutal, which is you know, always good. It was like learning all over again, like, because I'd only recently gone back to replay Quake anyway when the 30th anniversary was on, just because like it inspired me to anyway. And I'd heard this was coming, and I was like, oh, okay. And yeah, I always enjoy going back to it and just the level layouts. And I think before you went away, I recommended like the video series. I forget what one I said, but where you basically just get to look at that sort of stuff. Oh yeah, Civi's videos. So I sound dumb now saying that I didn't remember, but yeah, like Civi's stuff on like Quake levels and stuff just re-inspired me to sort of go back and try stuff out. I was like, wow, yeah, like some of it's like a faded memory sometimes, but even when you've revisited it, and you really get to appreciate all the cool things that the games do. Their biggest crime was just not being Doom, you know, and not being quite revolutionary in the same way. And because of the time period they came out, it was so close to what Half-Life did. And yeah, it's a very different. But man, yeah, this is just something else. Like, so, like the enemy changes. Like you have those sort of spins on classic enemies. So now you have ogres that have rockets rather than just pure grenades. You have dogs that basically drop grenades when they die and stuff like that, and just other stuff. Like and then you have the basically like a lightning axe and stuff like that, and this laser cannon. And, oh man, it's just little extra bits that fit and feel. And this has always been the good thing about machine games, is sort of involvement with the Quake games and the Doom games, as the old ones, is that they, given their history with modding and things like that for these games and expansions, they understand what those games should be. And as an aside, the biggest crime of what has happened to id, in this Xbox era that we're living in, is that so much of that is going to get lost and forever. But to have this, I mean, this is almost bittersweet to have something like this.
Right.
Hot on the heels, obviously, you talked about the Doom, the Dark Ages expansion, didn't you, recently? And it's like to have that 1-2 punch of that and this, whilst all that's going on around it, is just like, bittersweet, because it's like, how can we have all this damn good stuff and this free as well, which is just like insane, the amount of stuff. I mean, I consider it part of Quake canon, effectively, in terms of how I feel about Quake, a game that I love so much. But to have more of that game in 2026, 30 years after the fact, it's just nuts to me. Like, I would balk at the idea of like a game I love normally that from being remade, it would like looking the same but has a few extra new bits. Like that, it would feel a bit odd. Sometimes it works. Dead Rising was a good example with the deluxe remaster, where it was just it eased out a few of the problems with that game. Whereas these are just like, no, same game, some modern things that help like work on consoles, but it's essentially Quake, and now you have this extra Quake stuff, and it was tough to go through. I probably would have been preferring it back on mouse and keyboard, but my days of doing that are not where they were. Let's just say. So console it was, and great. It was still like a really intense, fun experience. Headphones on. Yeah, like it was transportive, I suppose is the word, and transformative, where I just felt like it was 30 years ago nearly, and like playing it again for the first time and just being how intimidating it was to play this fully 3D shooter, like, and all the extra things that brought, like, I played Doom. Duke Nukem was like the middle ground, and like then I played Quake, and I was like, oh wow, this just feels like strange. Something that, given the speed of progress at the time with how games moved into 3D spaces like they did, it was hard to catch up sometimes, and like it's a game that I've appreciated more and more with each passing year, and with the sequels doing what they did for me. But I think that I don't think there's any series where I have such a love for the first three games in the series like I do for this, like, which is really, really saying something, because Resident Evil exists, and and even Grand Theft Auto, even Metal Gear Solid, stuff like that. I have such joy from those games, but like there's always a weak link. There's something I don't like as much about what they changed in one of the games, and each Quake is so distinct in its own way, but still carries that flavor of what I like about it, that gameplay, that style, that feel, that id feel, right? As much as I will welcome it coming back, as it is rumored to do, it's going to be a bit sad that it's coming back now, like at this point, when it will probably be pushed to be something it shouldn't be, which is unfortunate. But without really telling you very much about the game at all, with Dawn of the Machine, it just evoked those feelings in me again, which is the remaster, sorry, itself did that to a degree anyway, but just this was like getting to discover like you'd missed something from the original game after all these years, like
right, yeah,
which was quite a common thing, I must say, back in the day, where you play like shareware versions of things, and you'd be like, you think you played like the game, and then like you'd play it years later and go, hang on, I don't remember this, or hang on, I don't remember that, and like that's great. But yeah, this does, it kind of feels like that, where you're just like, oh man, I missed a whole other part of the game, and it's fucking excellent.
As somebody that, I was more of a Doom guy growing up, and so I didn't play any of the Quake games really until probably around the time when we started this podcast. Partially because you were always talking about how much you enjoyed it, and so I was like, I guess I can give that a go. But I enjoyed it initially, um, but I did not have the same level of, admiration and love for it clearly as you did, because I just didn't grow up with it. And so what I can say from like my experience with the Quake series and, coming to this new chapter, um, all of the new content feels right at home. It doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. And that's always like my first sort of worry with a lot of like new DLC for classic games is like, sure, you have the freedom with which to do what you want with it, but are you going to create something that feels at home in the world of, whether it's the original or the sequels, or is it going to stick out? And, I think for me, Dawn of the Machine is indicative of something that feels right at home, while at the same time still presenting like new ideas and new concepts. Like the whole time loop and time folding in on and of itself is such a cool mechanic where, you get to play around with perception of time and other worlds to solve puzzles, and you get to watch the environment change at the same time the types of enemies are changing when you go through those portals and whatnot. And that just makes for an experience that, from what little of Quake previously had played, it makes it feel exciting in a way that I maybe wouldn't if I was going to be going back to play like vanilla Quake, if you will. Funny enough, when I was playing through Dawn of the Machine, I did go back and start playing some of the other chapters of the original Quake that I hadn't played previously. And I think I messaged you and was just like, yeah, cool. I was almost late to work again this morning because I was just like sinking so much time into Quake in a way that I wasn't expecting. And I think, first and foremost, Dawn of the Machine is a phenomenal mission pack. But also it captures the elements of the original Quake that are already so timeless and so engaging that it inspired me then to go back and replay some aspects of the base experience that I missed previously. So I think that also is like a great compliment in that you can play new content or a classic game, but then at the same time, like maybe that makes you miss the original experience or miss certain levels from back in the day and whatnot that you really enjoyed. So, it's just really great to play the story DLC and new missions that, as I said, it doesn't just feel like a series of challenge rooms, if you will, where it's like, cool, now I have to fight 15 ogres on screen at once. Like, no, each one of the levels has the appropriate amount of environmental puzzles, the correct amount of like rooms where you're given these challenges that feel like, it's like the arena shooter aspect kind of Quake. But each one of those levels also, just in terms of like the layout of them, is feels like they were given the right amount of attention that they deserve, rather than just throwing in a bunch of larger than life environments and you more or less just have to fight these endless waves of enemies. Like the pacing is really well thought out in that regard as well, I think. So yeah, just again, like tremendous work from Machine Games, who clearly like understand what made the original Quake so memorable, and then kind of just like build upon that in new and exciting ways.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, like I said, just stunning that we got something like this in 30 years later. That it just feels very unorthodox compared to what you're used to from when you get remakes and remasters, where sure, occasionally you get games that do like lost content and things like that, but no one's really done it like id and Machine Games have done with like the Doom and Quake games. Just the amount of stuff is staggering. Like, just like if you were to look on the surface of all these games, like on consoles and PC as they are now, you'd be like, oh yeah. It's like they're better looking versions of what they were. They have all these mod cons to make them feel more comfortable for modern systems. But then you look at everything beyond, like the mission packs and the mods and things like that. And you're like, wow, like this is bumper, and for the prices as well, like it is insane. Like it's the least cynical version of remastering and remaking something that I've ever seen. It is the stuff that it has done, and by God, do I hope they survive all the nonsense going on, like, and get to do their own thing if they're not going to be used properly. But I think they're unfortunately looking like they're going to be one of the companies that doesn't get away and also gets like gutted to a degree, which is the worst fate, I think, whereas others have got away and have gone independent. And yeah, it's it'll be a horrendous waste of such history.
Yes.
And this expansion is just like proof of that. Like, considering an anniversary is coming up, most people would have just been, oh, maybe they'll say a new Quake game's coming out, sort of thing. And there's like, oh, it's like, we just casually made a big old new expansion to the original Quake, and there it is for free, sort of thing like that. It's like the antithesis to the company that owns them. Like that's the most insane thing about it. It's a conflicting thing, but it's been a good time to be sort of reminded of the joys of past PC gaming this week. So.
And as a final note, that score still slaps. Like it,
new stuff
just,
in it
like
too. So it's like it just again feels like it fits. And
I was playing through on PC and just had my headphones blasting in a way that I haven't done in a while. So that was just very refreshing and enjoyable.
Yeah. Also, as an aside, that whole thing of like adding a persistent health thing, like where you can do like, grades and stuff, it's like it could have been a mess, like because it's tied to this campaign rather than just like reworking the whole game to fit it. Like it works because of the way the game works in this, in this expansion. So yeah, I love that the changes were tied to it, fit it, and weren't just like, again, one of those things that you would see is like overhauling of the game to fit a modern audience in a way that is a detriment to the spirit of what it was. So yeah, love that about it.
Hopefully that will see the surviving and carrying on of this trend, but as you said, we'll unfortunately have to wait and see. But that's going to leave us with the last game that you've been playing recently, and it's a sequel to a game that I somehow, despite my love of horror FPS, has never played the original. So how has No More Room in Hell 2 shaped up as a sequel?
Well, so and I will go into the backstory a bit here, because again, this series began life as a Half-Life mod with the original game, and back when I really got back into PC gaming, like this was one of the first things I really played. The first game, No More Room in Hell, because it was slow zombies, survival with other players online. It was unlike anything I'd played like out there, like in terms of what it was, and because it was built on that Half-Life engine, it was just it just had a very certain atmosphere to it. Oh man, the name says it all. It felt Romero-esque in so many ways in terms of what it did, and there was so much ambiguity to it where you were like, oh wow, this just feels like I'm stumbling through this situation and doing the best I can. The sequel, which is by the Chivalry developers, Torn Banner Studios, and again, as an aside, Chivalry 2 is like one of the most hilariously fun multiplayer games ever, where you just basically like have sword mechanics and like a medieval battlefield, effectively. Brilliant game in its own right. So they made the sequel. It was an early access for a long time. It got, to put it politely, shit on for quite a long time for how bad it was. I was watching a video about the game yesterday where the guy was basically like clearly very bitter about that point in the cycle about it, but was there to make a video about how much it had improved. it did maybe just laugh at it. It was like he didn't seem to understand how early access works, but at the same time, it does seem like it was in a pretty poor state, considering the expectations of the original game. So, in No More Room in Hell 2, which finally got out of early access very recently this month, and headed to consoles as well, which was like my big thing, because I was like, oh, I love the original game. Great, buy this sight unseen if it's going to be good. And so what this is like, you look at it and go, okay, so it's like Left 4 Dead, is it, like, sort of thing, which is derogatory, I think, but because it's an 8-player game for a start, tops. It fits what the modern idea of an extraction shooter in terms of like the mission structure for the main game. You go into a map, the maps are huge. You complete objectives, you work together, you get out, sort of thing, at the end of it, sort of thing. That's the idea. But there's a lot more to it than that in there, because so when you're dropped in, generally, unless you're playing with friends, you're all like dropped to different parts of the map. You'll have your major objectives, mini objectives, stuff like that will come up. You won't see where anyone else is on the map until you stumble upon some of the people, at least, sort of like. So initially, you're alone in a lot of cases, in a lot of the maps. There's a power plant map, which is like very rural in terms of like the outside of the map. So it feels really isolated, and the fog and the shadow and everything like that. And there are loads of zombies around. That's the idea. They are generally slow moving. Difficulty basically tiers the kind of zombies you will see. So most on the lower levels, I mean, beginner, as it's called, is only beginner in the sense of like there's not really many fast zombies or different zombie variants. It's mostly just the shambly dambly kinds. But even there, it adheres to the classic rule of like you can easily get outfoxed and outpaced by zombies if you get yourself in the wrong place in the wrong time, or if you don't pay attention to what you're doing. And the killer hook with this series is that at random, almost like you can be infected, like by one bite, one scratch at the wrong time. May not happen the first time, may not happen the second, third, fourth, but it could. It could be the first time it happens. It could be the fifth, like that. And you don't know it straight away until like your character starts like coughing at some point. At which point you can like find like these preventative pills in the maps that like keep you alive for long enough to maybe get out and survive beyond that. And in really rare cases, there's like a gene therapy kit which you can get that cures you, but can only cure the person who is DNA coded to. So it's not like a multi-use thing that anyone can use, sort of thing. So you had that sort of dynamic and danger, knowing that you can't just like mow things down. And because the entire structure of the game is very survival based, you are scrounging for supplies on the go in these missions. You're basically going into like clear up areas that are infected by turning on power to certain things like power plants or radio stations or whatever. So you have that, but obviously the infected are everywhere. And slow as they are, everything you would expect from a survival situation can happen. So you can get guns, they have bullets, they're limited, but also they're loud. They attract more and more the more noise you make. But being stealthy is difficult because it's so open a lot of the time. So you have all these problems to sort of contend with. And while it's better to find people and sort of work together to get the things done as quickly as you can, I mean, there's no time limit on what you do. Obviously, the longer you're in a map, the more noise everyone's making, the more likely you are to end up in hairy situations. And if you're together, obviously everyone's going after the same suppliers in the same place at the same time, might leave you short like that. If you played like the chivalry games, where the melee combat is very like combo focused almost, like, but in a very physical sort of movement way, it's kind of like that as well. So you can't just like wildly slash your way through, it's very stamina based. So you want to hit the head where you can, and do all the things in the right order. It's tactical in a way that is like surprising. If you've played the original game, probably not as surprising, but like I said, these maps are huge, and all the things that can happen just make them such an intimidating thing to be in. And they randomize certain aspects of the map, so like buildings where ammo drops will be, like certain objectives will change each time you play them, so you won't really get a proper bead on what to do. And even like where the zombies themselves are not set, so you can go for an area one time in a map, it seems eerily quiet. Another time they're everywhere like that, and that could just be because of like the luck of it. Sometimes it's just because people have already gone through an area and the noise they've made has made it worse. But yeah, it's already just makes it very exciting to do. Yeah, and at the end of every sort of run of what you're doing, once you complete all your missions, a helicopter will come in to sort of exfiltrate you, or a train or whatever, depending on the map, and you do a little holdout before the timer runs out and make sure everyone gets on there, which is naturally intense at that point, depending on how much ammo or whatever or you've got. But the teamwork thing is the fun thing, because obviously it's very stranger based and communication is key, but not to the point where you have to like talk constantly to really get across what needs to be done. Like there'll be code-based objectives where someone has to find a code book and then read out like what codes are there to input in a system, or you have to flip switches in a certain order, like a certain amount of time between you. And it's like, even when you don't know people, it seems to work quite well. Like people kind of get the idea of it like that. And because like there are usually multiple objectives that can be completed at any one time, you can kind of split into smaller teams across the map and like help each other out. It brings all those cool things you want to do in a zombie game, where you would just like the way you team up and the way you sort of strategize, and it's fantastic like that. It's still got some technical issues on PlayStation in terms of like especially where progress is concerned, because in extraction shooter style, your characters have permadeath. So if they die in the field or get left behind, they're gone. Like any sort of perks they had with them, etc., everything gone like that, which is fine and fair if it's because you died in the field. But there's like technical glitches have happened where you can't jump and properly. You can't basically like vault onto things where you should normally be able to. Which like there's a map where it requires you to climb onto a train. If you're on the tracks, you can't climb up, or you can't interact with like the rappelling thing that takes you up to the helicopter. Which panicked me on one where I got away with it, because eventually, after getting hit by a zombie, I managed to get out of that cycle and ended up like being able to go back up. But it happened on a train and I could not get off. Like, and then that character died when I put so much effort into it, and that was frustrating. Because to be honest, that's the only time I've lost a character so far is because of the game having technical issues. I said with the funny thing was that day, I think it was like I had the Creepshow issues. I had that happen, and I was playing at eFootball, and there was like some stupid shenanigans where the in-game AI just like messes with you sometimes to ensure that you concede a goal. And it's like it all happened in the same day. And I was like, it's like the whole console's against me sort of today, or the whole game's system is against me, sort of thing. And but yeah, so you have tiny issues like that. But God, no, the experience is just so enriching, just so exciting, and like missions take like anywhere between half an hour and an hour, like to do, just because depends on how things go. And it's the fact that it remains intimidating time after time, and you can't really get away with missed shots very well, and like just like picking stuff. You never feel safe for long, which is like the best thing about it. It's like there's so little respite, like because of the way the game's set up. And I never really touched it before this. Like I didn't really get into the whole early access stuff. I'd heard rumblings that it wasn't really doing things for people, but in the same way the first game did. And like I said, it's PC, so I didn't really want to go touching it in that state as it was. So yeah, no, it's blown me away how much fun I've had with it. Yeah, it definitely could have a bit more time spent on just sort of smoothing a few of those rough edges out. But yeah, it's just the most fun I've had in a co-op experience for some time. Like in terms of this kind of game. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I love the notion that, normally with a game such as this, it's safety in numbers, but I love, because of the seeming like survival elements, that's not always the case, because of the fact that, like you said, it's like either resources are going to get scooped up fairly quickly, or again, the nature of firearms can attract a new horde or something like that. So I like this notion that, despite the fact that I believe you said 8 players, you could still branch off into your own little squads just to kind of like spread out amongst the map and not essentially like end up, running, clogging up a doorway with 7 other people, and then a horde shows up type of a thing. But one thing I just wanted to circle back to, you were talking about like the notion of a progression system, and that being that, is the progression just you get to keep your character with the perks and everything they have if they survive, or is there some kind of like overarching progression other than that?
So there's unlocks that, like for customization and stuff, like that you can build, and you can upgrade the perks themselves, so that when you get a character next, which are randomized, you can get those upgraded versions of those perks later. So you have all that. So it unlocks certain things at later dates, and you can. But yeah, like certain costs will come to. I mean, even down to the loadout stuff. If you want a certain weapon, so you can tailor to. So if you say, like me, you want to be very shotgun heavy, like you'll make sure that your skill set is very shotgun based. That your pellet spread will be bigger, that your range will be greater, like that. That you'll find more ammo, stuff like that. It's just all adds up. They've basically made sure that certain weapons you can't unlock. Like you'll find them in the better versions of shotguns and stuff in the world occasionally and stuff like that, but it's a rarity. There's no guarantee where to find them and anything like that. So you can go in with like the basic 2-shell shotgun, and then find the better one later. And you could buy like the better versions of weapons, like in terms of like handguns that are more powerful, but obviously the chance of ammo usually is quite smaller. Again, you can unlock the ability to bring like a small amount of ammo with that gun as well, to sort of give you a head start. But generally, it's just about thinking of the build you want to be. Do you want to be someone who's like a tank who can take the damage, who's very melee focused, or do you want to be have the stamina to run through areas and just like pick up the supplies? Because there's this underlying thing as well of like as you're doing these objectives, you pick up like a target amount of these supplies, which don't count towards your inventory cost. So because when it comes to like guns and ammo and pickups for like the Molotovs and whatever and health stuff, they all count to like there's like an overall weight limit that you can only have certain amount of stuff. So it stops you from just like looting everything, and stops greed from being a problem. But yeah, when it comes to the supplies, it's just like you can pick up as many as you like. There are like special ones that they give you like a big chunk of stuff, and they do take up like a space in your inventory. But yeah, it's again one of the most exciting things is the fact that you're doing all this inventory management on the fly and figuring out what you need and what you don't need, deciding, oh, maybe I'll have to drop this weapon, because the weapons, you don't bring anything home in terms of like your equipment. Like your loadout is what you go out with. Anything you pick up in the field is for the use of that time. So you don't have to feel that shrewd about it. You tend to find that you'll know roughly where you are in terms of the mission structure. So you'll say, well, okay, I'll save this big gun and its shells for later, and I'll try and like make do with being melee now and stuff like that. But it changes from map to map, and environment, and depending on your character that you've rolled and the abilities they've got, what you want to play like. Like you definitely develop a style. Like I think even so, but I think there are little adaptations that make you better for the team playing a certain way like that. And yeah, teamwork is definitely good to do. Like that's the thing about it. It's like because of that sort of limited inventory space, there's no real selfishness. Yes, people will pick up what they need is immediately in most cases without sharing. But I have found so far that people will like communicate, oh, I've got some shells or I've got bandages or I've got whatever. Does anyone need like that? And it's like a really cool mix of stuff, like of the zombie games that I've enjoyed in the past, made into this like exciting new version of it. I mean, the reviews on the game, I know in Steam especially, have been mostly positive since the going out of early access. So it's pushed the game from I think negative to mixed overall or something. But yeah, I mean, I have sunk a good few hours into it already this last week. It's just been my kind of game. Like I've really enjoyed it. I'm probably less of a fan of when you get the variants in terms of zombies. I do kind of like the having a lot of slow zombies because I think they add enough. But I do like a system like this where when you feel like, well, I've had all the challenge I can get out of this. Now, what if I ramp it up one? And it's like it does really like spice things up because God, like it feels intense in the early going, but when you start ramping things up in terms of difficulty, the less ammo, there's no respawns, like and yeah, it's horrid. Like it's like it becomes yeah, fantastic. I've been really enjoying it so far. I mean, I can tell, that it's by the characters, the developers that have made Chivalry 2, because I don't know, there's just this, I don't know, tactile feeling to it, where you feel like you're really doing stuff and you feel very weighted in the world.
Well, I was going to ask about, you'd mentioned the special infected. Like, are those more or less the standard fare that we're used to from something like Left 4 Dead? And how often are they being thrown into the mix compared to like the Shamblers and whatnot?
It's not as much as you'd think. The more, again, higher difficulty levels, the more that will appear in any given map.
Sure.
There'll be ones that basically attract more. There'll be which do appear even on the lowest difficulty, but they're not fast. You do get, even on the beginner difficulty, you do get like the occasional runner, which are terrifying because you hear them and they have this comical running footstep sound, and you hear the way they scream and they're coming. And because you aren't like super slick, super fast moving as a human being, like you do have moments of panic where you're, oh shit, like that. Just lots of moment of vulnerability, even with the slow ones, where you just like even doing the simple thing like I need to turn a valve or I need to do this little switch puzzle. It's like if someone hasn't got your back, you feel so naked in those moments that it's just going to be horrifying. But like I said, especially with that sort of infection thing being a risk where you could lose your character like that. I mean, there is like this option to early extract on your own as well after a certain point, so where you get like less XP and stuff, but you can get out if your character's infected or overwhelmed and just like make sure they survive for another fight sort of thing, which is smart system. Like I can't really say too much more, to be honest. It's just one of my favorite sort of online sort of zombie game experiences I've had in a long time, and because it just feels like what I want, in very much the same way that No More Room in Hell, the original game, felt. It's the game I wanted, dialed up.
Well, yeah, I think, given the amount of zombie games that we've played, but also just like still being inundated with zombie games that don't necessarily feel like they are progressing the subgenre, or just like not progressing maybe, but like doing something new and interesting. Kind of the way that you've been describing the sequel, it sounds like it's providing a multiplayer experience that differs from, the Back for Blood fare, if you will, where it's like, yeah, we're just going to, again, throw a horde at you and then you and a couple people get to fight through them. But it sounds more like, this is a variety of objective based, and like the survival mechanics, like I had mentioned, those are the types of things that I think are giving me pause more than I normally do with zombie games these days. And more than likely, we'll try to get around to playing this as, these days I feel like, well, I guess I could just ask you as a last thing. Do you feel like the survival elements of it scratch an itch that might not be to the same degree, but to somewhat of a degree that you've been getting from like your time with DayZ, which was another zombie multiplayer game you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's more like intense, obviously, in terms of what it's. But yeah, the fact that that dynamic with people, I think, is important. Obviously, no one can really betray you in the same sense here, but it's the idea that you are brought together with a common understanding of how the game works. It's not for Twitch shooters. Yeah, it's like it's not like, oh, look how well I can rack up zombie kills. That's not like even a factor in any of point scoring and stuff. It's like they are just there.
You didn't stumble upon the rare machine gun.
Yeah, that's it. It's like it is about getting the mission done, getting the supplies, and basically, it is geared towards that. And if you're lucky enough, you'll survive, and your reward is survival, and your character can maybe be a bit better with the next perk they unlock, sort of thing. And that's it. And again, I like that dynamic. It feels kinder, to the multiplayer sort of side of it. Yeah, it's remarkable because I think one person has been unpleasant in the entire time we played, and they were very clearly deliberately going out their way to be unpleasant. There was a whole back and forth between an English guy and some American guys where they then just ripped the piss out of him with talking about eating biscuits and drinking tea, which lowest form of English slander, but at the same time he was being a dick, and the way they were being about it was funny. Like and it didn't hurt the mission because he was on an island on his own being stupid and selfish, but everyone else was working together without needing to discuss how they were working together. Everyone understands what the mission is. Everyone knows what they want to do. I mean, you can play the game solo, like that is an option, but God, that sounds like it would be terrifying, to be honest. Like it's bad enough when there are people around like to help maybe, but yeah, it is quite satisfying as well to just like save someone and no one has to say a word like about thanks. Like there's no real reward beyond having more people kind of helps me survive. That's it, which is it feeds into that selfish idea of like how community, and like, okay, well, it helps me so it helps them and vice versa, so we can just make this work for us.
So I guess my truly final question for you about this would be, do you feel that it's fairly pick up and play? You've mentioned a couple of like mechanics there within that sound somewhat hardcore, but you then also said that like you haven't encountered many unpleasant, let's say, players, but at the same time, like, do you think this is the thing you can just dive right into? And while it might take a few matches to get a better grasp on it, you could basically be shepherded along without being a detriment to the rest of the group on like your first or second play?
Yeah, I mean, I had, even when I was like figuring it out, people kind of knew what they were doing. So I was like, oh, good. Okay. So that kind of guided me roughly through what was going on. And like I said, because everyone's got to complete the objectives to finish the mission, there's no way to sort of sabotage it in that sense. It's like, if you're going to play it that way, then what's the point? You're not going to do, it's not going to help you in the slightest to mess other people up. So yeah, you can kind of be guided through the early going of it. And like I said, people are generally helpful where they need to be. So yeah, I think there's an intimidation factor which has to be there, I think, but has a level of it where you can understand it. I think if you've played any survival game, any extraction game, the fundamentals are there, where you're kind of cotton on to what you need to do. And the basic idea being zombies may be slow, but you can get cornered, you can run out of bullets, you can be reloading at the wrong moment, and you could be dying before the end of this mission if you're not careful. It's a game that is always on your back, always urging you to be careful. And I think that kind of helps you learn on the job.
Added yet another zombie game to my list of things that I need to check out, which has been, hopefully, if the trend continues like it did with Dying Light and Dead Island, then I'll be getting my zombie fix in another way that'll be rewarding later.
Also, super good zombie shotgun splatter. So yeah, it's just
there you go.
It's one of my favorite things of using a shotgun, and just also occasionally the collision detection isn't what it should be, but I understand that at least. But when it works, just knowing that if you line up a headshot on a zombie with a shotgun, it will fucking take their head off. It's just beautiful.
It sounds like zombie fans have a more than one reason to rejoice and to check out No More Room in Hell 2. So now my decision is, do I want to play it on Xbox or am I going to play it on PC? But that's a problem for another day that hopefully I can report back on before the end of the year.
Yeah, I think it is crossplay as well. So if I remember rightly.
Terrific. Even more reason to check it out. But yeah, that's going to do it this week. Neil, as always, it's a pleasure chatting horror with you. Safe Room.
Back at you on that. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Safe Room. If you've enjoyed our horrifying discussions, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your preferred podcast platform, as this helps us immensely in ensuring that the show continues to grow. For any and all show updates and additional content, you can follow Safe Room on all of our socials, which are linked in the episode notes below. And finally, you can send any and all emails to saferoompod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you guys next Monday.